Should you jump into an ice bath after exercise, or is that gonna ruining all of your gains? Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, I've been cold plunging for several years at all times of the day, and lately I've heard a lot of controversy about the idea of jumping into an ice bath or a cold plunge after exercise. Because if you think about it, you see pro athletes all the time after a competition, after a tough training, they submerge themselves in ice cold water to reduce inflammation and to recover quicker. So cold plunging has been a vehicle for a long time to improve recovery and by extension athletic performance. But lately a lot of people say if you do that, you're gonna negatively impact your muscle gains, and so don't do that. And so in this video we're gonna talk a little bit about what's real, what you should consider, and add maybe a little bit of context to the conversation, because as so often context matters and there are no hard and fast rules that say yes you should or you should not submerge yourself to ice cold water after exercise. And before we get into this, maybe let me know what type of cold plunge do you have. I'm super interested to always hear what people are using, what brands, what products. So go to the comments and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about what happens during exercise and what happens when you jump into, an ice bath. And most of you probably already know that ice baths can be anti-inflammatory. They can reduce inflammation, which is one of the core benefits of cold plunging. On the flip side, when you exercise, especially when you do resistance training, strength training, when you lift heavy weights with the purpose of gaining muscle tissue, increasing your lean muscle tissue. In order to do that for your body, there is also an inflammatory response involved. So there is inflammation post-exercise that you could then blunt by jumping into cold water, because that's anti-inflammatory. So does it mean that no, you should not be cold plunging after exercise because otherwise all your gains are gonna be gone? Not quite. And if you see pro athletes jump into ice cold water after a competition, that's usually because the goal of the competition is not to train to improve or to grow your muscle mass. Competition comes at the end of training. You build up muscle, obviously depending on the sport or your endurance, and then you compete. So what you do after the competition, it doesn't really negatively impact the gains that you've accomplished leading up to the competition. And so that's why if you see pro athletes do that, that doesn't really fly in the face of you shouldn't be doing it after exercise. No, you can very well do this. In fact, even on days or for certain types of competition where you have several competitions on a single day. Imagine the CrossFit Games. You have 3, maybe more competitions, and in between you see athletes jump into the ice bath to reduce their pump, to reduce blood flow at the end of the day, temporarily at least, and to reduce inflammation so they can then compete again. None of that really impacts the athlete's performance in the grander scheme of things, because again, they are not doing it after every single workout. And so there it's perfectly fine. Now, if you go to the gym and you lift a lot of weights, you do maybe squats or deadlifts or whatever, you want to increase your lean muscle tissue, then jumping into an ice bath for 10 minutes is probably not a good idea, because yes, the ice bath will negatively impact your inflammatory response, which is a good thing if you want to deal with or reduce inflammation. But in the context of allowing your body to build new muscle tissue, to repair damaged muscle tissue, negatively impacting inflammation is not a good thing. You need inflammation at that point. But here is the nuance. There is certainly a difference between jumping into an ice bath at 45 degrees, 50 degrees maybe, and staying in for a minute or two, and jumping into an ice bath that has literally ice floating around, that's at the freezing point, and staying in there for 10 minutes, which will likely entirely impact your inflammatory response. So again, there is context and there is nuance. There's nothing wrong with coming back from a workout, maybe being all sweaty and exhausted, and taking a quick dip in cold water that doesn't necessarily have to be freezing. But even if you jump into freezing water and you don't stay in long enough, just so that you get a quick refresher, it's not gonna impact anything. I mean, I've been plunging at all times of the day, before, during, in between workouts. Can I say that it has negatively impacted muscle tissue? I mean, I'm not a pro athlete, so I don't measure my lean muscle tissue every single month. I do it once a year typically, and from year to year I've not seen any difference. So that's really my recommendation. Don't take this as a fast and hard rule. Think about what you're trying to accomplish. Think about what you've done in training, what type of training maybe you've done. If you've done more endurance work that wasn't necessarily involved, or that didn't involve a lot of muscle breakdown, jumping into an ice bath is likely less of an issue than if you came back from a resistance training session where your specific goal was to destroy muscle tissue for the purpose of rebuilding it and coming out stronger on the other end. In that case, I would limit my cold water exposure, maybe wait for a couple of hours, even though, and here is the nuance, we don't really know what the window is. The ice bath can blunt muscle growth post-workout. So I cannot tell you wait 2 hours and you'll be fine, because I don't know. Nobody really knows as far as I can tell. But give it a couple of hours, I would say, and then limit your exposure to water that's maybe not incredibly cold. It doesn't have to be at the freezing point, and limit your time in the cold to avoid any potential negative effects. And one thing that I would recommend you as well to consider cold plunging after sauna bathing. You know, I really like to do this as part of my recovery routine. If I work out hard, I jump into the sauna, and I guess at this point it would be a perfect opportunity to introduce the sponsor of this video, and that is Sweat Tent. Sweat Tent makes a fairly inexpensive but high quality sauna that comes with a wood stove that heats that sauna to an incredible 240 degrees Fahrenheit. The wood stove is also super easy to light up. That was one of my main concerns when I got into, using a wood stove in a sauna and instead of an electrical heater. It's really easy to heat up. It heats up incredibly quickly. 20 minutes and you're over 200 degrees. Give it a little bit more and you top out at 240 degrees, and that really gives it a perfect sweat. It has sauna rocks you can pour water over. So really the traditional Finnish sauna experience at very high temperatures. And we have a dedicated review of Sweat Tent. You want to check that out? We're going to link it down below. It has everything you need to know about this awesome product. One of my favorite saunas we have, and we have now four saunas in our backyard. One of my favorite ones for sure. And that review has discount code and everything you need to know, so check that out. But the reason why I bring this up is because going from a sauna then into the cold, I like to do contrast therapy after working out, because that really gets your blood flow going, works your cardiovascular system. So by going from hot to cold, I typically do 15-20 minutes in the sauna, 1 minute in the cold plunge, going back to the sauna for another 15 to 20 minute session, and then I end in cold unless I do 3 cycles depending on how much time I have. And if you do that post-workout, like limit your cold water exposure to 1 minute, just to close the pores in the skin, just to cool down so you're ready for the next sauna session. And then at the end, you finish with cold for a minute again. It doesn't have to be longer. That will not negatively impact your muscle gain. So don't be too afraid. Use your head, think about what you're trying to accomplish, and maybe do your cold plunging on days where you don't do strength training. That's probably the safest bet. But even if you do it on days you work out, you exercise, you lift heavy weights, higher temperature maybe, less time, contrast therapy. And with that, we're gonna wrap it up. Let me know in the comments. Have you learned something? Does it make sense? Do you feel more confident about making those decisions when you should cold plunge and whether or not you should cold plunge post-workout? Let me know. I'd like to hear from you. Share this video with someone who could use it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.